All right, I think let's get started, everyone. We want to welcome you all to Navigating for Change. We're so excited that you all are here with us this morning. Before we get started, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the bodies of stolen land that we are all on today. There are 23 sovereign tribal nations that share the same geography with Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Despite generations of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and forced removal, Native Americans are still here and they are thriving. I'm calling in from Minneapolis this morning, which is home to the Dakota people. Throughout this morning's conversation, please hold space for the history of the Native people in our community. One way that you can also do that is to support the Native Governance Center. Wayne Ducheneaux is here with us this morning. He's the executive director of Native Governance Center, and I see we've got lots of folks from that organization dialing in today as well. You can learn more about them at nativegov.org. I am Julie Cohen. Hi, good morning, everyone. I am the Engagement and Advancement Director at Pollen Midwest, and I use she, her pronouns.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrea Kopfmann, and I am the Director of Partnerships at GiveMN, and my pronouns are she, her. Thank you all for bringing your energy this morning. I was a little worried that we'd be missing out on the electricity of being together in one giant room, but y'all are really making it feel like a live event. So thank you. I love reading the chat notes. Hi to everyone. Thank you again for being here. I just want to take a minute and say thank you to Julie. Julie and I have been working on this together along with all of our partners at Hands On Twin Cities, Propel, and we're so grateful to be with you today. It's been about a year in the making, so thank you, partners, for your patience and all your work and all the energy that you're going to bring along with your knowledge to today's event. So thank you again. We could not be more excited to be here with you today.
Thanks, Andrea. I really appreciate that. And special thanks also to Tom from Pollen and Millie from Propel, and again, all of our partners. But Tom and Millie are our rock star producers this morning, so please give them a shout out in chat as well. So why are we here today? When the COVID-19 pandemic took hold here in Minnesota, it may have seemed as though everything came to a halt. Yes, we all sheltered in place, but then our nonprofit community got right to work communicating with our supporters and our members and our clients about their immediate needs, and then shifting everything to be able to meet those needs. And then a couple of months later, we found ourselves at the epicenter of a national reckoning around police brutality and public safety after the murder of George Floyd. So we're all still kind of finding our bearings, and just as we've tended to our communities through these multiple crises, we've started to tend to our own nonprofit needs. And to stay in it for the long haul, we know that our fundraising, our financial management, our communications, and our engagement efforts need to work in concert with one another. Bear with us for 1 second. We may have lost our, there you are, Andrea.
Hi, today is all about centering your needs. Navigating Through Change emerged in 2017 as a standalone, as-needed event. It's a pop-up for nonprofit organizations who are experiencing significant transition, like funding loss, staffing changes, or scaling and growth. These event programming focused on fundraising, finance, and communications, working together to ensure a smooth transition. So again, GiveMN, Pollen, Propel Nonprofits, and Hands On Twin Cities have all come together again today to present this no-cost virtual event for Minnesota nonprofits, as we are clearly still experiencing significant change. And of course, today would not be possible without our support from the Bush Foundation. Their financial support today allows us to have this event at no cost to you. So you are all attending at no cost because of the Bush Foundation. So thank you so much, Bush Foundation.
All right. Thank you, Bush. Yes. And now it's time for some real talk, y'all. So we're here in 2021. The pandemic continues to rage on amid economic and civic turmoil and continued calls to reckon with racial and social injustices throughout Minnesota and the country. So we as a nonprofit sector are standing at a precipice in this new year, and what comes next will shape our collective future for decades to come. To ready our hearts and minds for the imagination and transformation that will be required of us, we have invited Saymoukda Vongsay to perform a piece commissioned by Pollen. Saymoukda Vongsay is a Lao American writer. Her work focuses on creating tools and spaces for the amplification of refugee voices through poetry, theater, and experimental cultural production. Her plays have been presented by the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, Theater Mu, and Theater Unbound. She's a Playwrights Center and Theater Mu Fellow in Playwriting, a Loft Literary Center Fellow in Poetry and Children's Literature, a Twin Cities Media Alliance Fellow in Public Art, an Aspen Ideas Bush Foundation Fellow, and was recently named a Jerome Hill Artist Fellow. Her work has also been mentioned by the New York Times, Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine, Minnesota Original, Minnesota Public Radio, and many more. Please join me in welcoming Saymoukda.
Thank you, Julie. This morning we had a good laugh because my mic was unmuted and Julie couldn't hear me. So she's like, I couldn't hear you, I couldn't hear you. So then I'm like, unmute me, fool. No, just kidding, I didn't say that. But we did laugh about it and we needed laughter. We especially need laughter at this time, like literally because it was 8:30 in the morning, but also we need laughter. We need joy because laughter works our hearts and it works our bellies and our thighs. And so we gotta remain healthy for the fight ahead. Something that I was wondering about when I was working on the poem was imagination and how can I free up time to even to think about imagination. Coming from somebody who is like me, someone who is a former refugee, someone who identifies as a motherland orphan, someone who is someone's neighbor, because sometimes we just don't get to have that luxury of sitting and being free and to just imagine things. So this poem is for all of you who's out there doing this work, trying to imagine better things for our communities. Right now, the working title is Break Your Face, and Julie will explain that later. It is inevitable. Sometimes we break like teeth and promises, bones and hearts, branch and ground, chaos and code, habits and faith. Sometimes we break open like pods and doors, dawn and silence. Sometimes we break apart. Sometimes we break down. We are just pieces getting ready to disassemble ourselves into a fire. The future won't have us in it. If my ancestors taught me anything, it is that fire creates new life, an affirmation to let go, to make way for something else to shape, to take on something that we have not felt before. Maybe a sound that's new, or one that you have always craved for, like sun rays stroking your skin. Maybe a new song, maybe a new feeling, or a different way to understand what we have held once before, only now its heavy is new. Its angles, indents different on our palm, its colors, its smell, a little bit familiar and reminds us of home. Home has a simple recipe. Some call for more laughing parents than canned meat. Some call for cups and cups of giggling grandfathers in bouncy castles, dashes of hand-holding, peeled Korean drama marathons, handfuls of lullabies once forgotten, and bowls and bowls and bowls of cut fruit spilling over, handed to you with luscious words like, I'm sorry, or sweet, juicy ones like, I love you. But sometimes the ingredients are hard to come by, and you'll have to go look. Float to the surface of your first memory when you were in water, scraping scales with the naga. It left 2 lines in your torso to keep your secrets, to help you remember your purpose after you've sprouted feet. pilgrimage to the place where your mother planted fish, swimming in the sky. Drink in your lineage, woven into the pit of a dream. Remember the taste of Buddha's hand, that drumming that woke you up to take your place to give alms to flies and monks. Remember to not shoo away the flies. They are only providing you an opportunity to practice compassion. Listen for chocolate honeycomb, sweet buzzing that swarms across your chest and warms your belly and lights up fauna and flora transplanted here from your motherland. Be the water they'll need to survive in the strange soil. If your well becomes dry, I invite you to time walk with me to that moment when you first laughed. Remember the unnecessary amount of time you took to consider how many butts a buffalo might have. One is not the answer. But come and time walk with me to contemplate how many oceans live inside the heart. Every time I break, I trace the root of my thumb. I fly around with mud puppies, shuck out of my water body, and dance forward into myself. And when you reach the edge of the sea, or hunger at the cusp of a vision, let a dragon fruit sing you home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saymoukda, so much. That was really beautiful. Yes, break your face. I have a, we had so much fun talking about that this morning. Wayne had commented about the repetitiveness of things breaking open throughout your poem, and my brain immediately went to breaking capitalism and white supremacy and the patriarchy and all the oppressive systems that we as a nonprofit sector are working to dismantle. So I hope everyone found some inspiration and energy from that poem this morning. Thank you again, Saymoukda. We really appreciate you being here with us this morning. So for everybody who's here with us today, we hope you'll carry that same energy and inspiration with you throughout the day as you attend your various breakout sessions and partner sessions. We design navigating through change with you at the center. We believe that you are the expert on your own nonprofit, and you have the answers. You might just need some help drawing them out, and you are by no means alone in this work. We had almost 500 nonprofit leaders from across the state register to attend today's event. I think last time I checked our participant count in Zoom, we were well over 200. So I'm really glad to see that sort of representation from across the state, and just, be open to sharing what you know with one another. We've got a lot of awesome nonprofit leaders in the room today. So share what you know with one another, ask questions, be open to learning something new.
Everyone's path will be different, but one common lesson is already clear. There's no one single program that will magically fix what the last year has undone. To build what's next, all of our programs and people need to work together. We designed today's event and programming to provide collaborative and comprehensive support, so you can come up with a plan that incorporates every aspect of your work. And obviously, we are doing this virtually. Technology happens, so please let's give each other some grace if things aren't absolutely perfect. So here's what you can look forward to today. For our morning breakout sessions, feel free to go to whatever room you most identify with. You'll find friendly faces to meet and time to connect with your peers, and you may go into small group discussions from each room to share your experiences and anything else you'd like to discuss. There will not be a formal presentation in the breakouts. It's just time to connect and learn from one another. And at 11:45 until 1 p.m., please take a lunch break, take a nap, tend to whatever you need. I'd personally recommend snuggling with your cat during this time. And at our 1 o'clock sessions, you can go online and check out more detailed descriptions. You can just go to navigatingthroughchange.org. And again, attend whichever session you'd like. We'd love to see you in any of these sessions. And I think Tom's going to put that bit.ly link in the chat. So thank you, Tom. And towards the end of the day, you can again choose your own venture, decide how you'd like to conclude your day. You can connect with your nonprofit peers in the networking lounge hosted by Hands On Twin Cities. You can share and discuss your renewal practices in the restoration lounge hosted by Pollen, or debrief on the day's conversation in the knowledge lounge hosted by my fabulous team at GiveMN. And of course, you may always exit stage left after 3:15 to lay down and take care of yourself again.
Thanks, Andrea. So before we get into this morning's plenary session, we just have a few housekeeping notes that we wanted to share. Remember, the day is yours. Choose which sessions would be most helpful to you, knowing that we are recording the sessions and we'll be sharing those after the event, with the exception of some sessions that are a little bit more confidential in nature. We also have lots of breaks scheduled throughout the day when you can tend to yourself and your many other commitments, cats, children, dogs, plants, whatever. Feel free to take the time that you need today. As Andrea mentioned, let's all give each other some grace today, grace for the compounding traumas that we've been experiencing, grace for our waning attention spans, grace for our hosts and our presenters, and grace for any technology hiccups. This room that we're in right now, bit.ly/NTC main, is going to be open and staffed throughout the day. So if you have any questions or you need help finding the link to the session you want to go to, you can always hop in here and we'll point you in the right direction. You should have also received a pre-event email via Eventbrite that had links to all of today's sessions.
Thanks, Julie. You may find yourself in breakout rooms for small group discussions today, and I just want to go through a few guidelines to keep in mind. Take space, make space. If you're usually quiet, challenge yourself to take up more space. And if you usually talk a lot, be mindful to leave the room for other voices as well. We're all here to share and learn, so let's make sure everyone has an opportunity to do so. Be game, be vulnerable. Be curious, take risks, and be kind and respectful to others as they do so. This is a learning space. Share the lesson, not the story. Many of the conversations you'll be a part of today may be personal or involve confidential information. While we encourage people to share what they're learning on social media with their colleagues after the events, we ask that people take names and organizations away from those stories unless given explicit permission. So if you would like to use the hashtag to hype us all up, or maybe share some nuggets that you hear today, feel free to use the hashtag RealTalkNTC and follow along and just hear what everyone else is talking about. And also, you'll be hearing from me after the event. If you would mind taking a short survey, it'd be so helpful. Please don't be a Minnesotan and brush it off or lie to me the whole time. Tell me what you really think. I mean, this event is called Real Talk, so I want to hear what worked for you, what didn't work for you, and what you learned today. So thank you in advance for taking that survey.
All right, so now it is time to move into our morning plenary session. We're so excited to be able to host this intimate conversation about what's next for the nonprofit sector with visionary leaders Candace Montgomery of Black Visions, Wayne Ducheneaux of the Native Governance Center, and Ruby Oluoch, who is Pollen's studio manager, who's going to be moderating this morning's conversation. Ruby manages the relationships and collaborative processes that bring Pollen Studios' design and storytelling expertise to other mission-driven client projects. Her previous experience includes managing communications projects to advance gender and racial equity statewide. She believes telling stories is an act of love and resistance, and she is the proud organizer of several literary circles in the Twin Cities. Her favorite place to read is on the plane to her next travel adventure. Please join me in welcoming Ruby.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, good people, and a special good morning to our panelists, Candace and Wayne. I am so honored and completely thrilled to be moderating this conversation between the both of you and your brilliant minds. So thank you for that introduction, Julie. As Julie shared, my name is Ruby. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm the Pollen Studio Manager. And now I will share some short introductions of our panelists, Wayne and Kandace, before we get to our real talk. Wayne Ducheneaux is an enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe and grew up on the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation on his parents' cattle ranch. He is the executive director of the Native Governance Center, a nonprofit organization focused on helping tribal nations grow their capacity to exercise sovereignty. Prior to joining NGC in 2016, he served just under 4 years on the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribal Council as a District 4 Council representative and was the tribal vice chairman from 2012 to 2014. He also served his nation as administrative officer from 2010 to 2012 and ran the Cheyenne River Motel, a tribal hotel enterprise located in Eagle Butte, South Dakota. He is a proud husband to Megan and father to Vida, Aiden, and Alexander. Now to introduce Kandace. Kandace Montgomery is a Black and queer organizer, facilitator, and strategist, working to expand our collective ability to build power that transforms systems and people. She has spent the last decade developing programming, training, and strategies that center the lives of people of color at local, statewide, and national organizations. By centering and unapologetically prioritizing the lives and leadership of diverse Black communities, she aims to develop the solutions necessary for transformative change. Kandace's political home rests with Black Visions as the co-executive director, currently leading local strategies to engage young Black, queer, and trans people and their families to build cultural and political power capable of transformation and ending systemic violence. Kandace is a member of the Movement of Black Lives and a trainer with Momentum, a training community dedicated to teaching and learning the craft of popular movements fighting for justice. In addition, she is a co-owner of the Purple Palace Project, an imaginative experiment in affordable community-centered housing that has successfully provided a home for over a dozen queer and trans people of color involved in social change while cultivating spaces of joy and fellowship. Kandace graduated magna cum laude from University of Massachusetts Amherst with a Bachelor's of Science in Public Health. Kandace is also a gardener, proud cat mom, food enthusiast, and Octavia E. Butler fangirl. All right, now let's move on to our discussion for the morning. I'd like to ask both of you to share with us the work of your organization. So Kandace, could you please start us off by telling us about the work of Black Visions?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name's Kandace. I use she and they pronouns. Ruby, thanks for holding on to that long bio. I definitely did a quick copy and paste. It was a task I had to do one day. I didn't edit it. I appreciate you all for listening to that. So I am one of the co-executive directors of Black Visions and one of the folks who helped to found the organization. Black Visions is a Black-led queer and trans centering organization that is really working to bring Black communities together for the sake of our autonomy, for the sake of our power, for the sake of our liberation. And that work for the last several years since we started in 2017 has primarily been at addressing systems of violence, specifically around policing in Minneapolis, as well as really building with other Black, Indigenous, and POC leaders in the environmental justice movement to connect and think about how we are centering those most directly impacted in the fight. So that's a little bit about our work. We're also a membership-based organization. So we really try to invest in the leadership of young Black, queer, and trans people because many of us who founded the organization have struggled for so long, and political home that allows us to show up as our full Black selves. And so that's really a big part of our work and my favorite part of our work.
Thank you, Kandace. Wayne, could you please share with us a little bit more about the work of Native Governance Center?
Homitakepi, Chante Washte Napechi Uzapiolo, Wayne Ducheneaux, Makichapie. Hello, my relatives. I greet you all with a good heart and a handshake. My name is Wayne Ducheneaux, and as has been mentioned a couple times, I'm the Executive Director of Native Governance Center. Native Governance Center is a nonprofit organization where our sole mission is to help tribal governments grow their capacity to exercise sovereignty. We really do that two ways. We run leadership programs like the Native Nation Rebuilders Program, Youth Rebuilders, and our Rebuilder Alumni Engagement Programming. And then we do it through direct tribal governance support, where we go out to the 23 nations that share geography with North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota Makoche, and meet with elected tribal leaders, stand shoulder to shoulder, and find community-based solutions with which we bring resources to bear to help. And so that's with our in-house expertise, our network of content partners, and our ability to help fund nation-building projects that align with our mission from tribal nations. That's really it in a nutshell. I wanted to be brief. But before I turn the mic back over, I also wanted to thank you all for the beautiful land acknowledgement this morning. It's a great first step into helping smash invisibility for Native nations.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you both for giving us some background on the work of your organizations and the incredible work that's happening in both of them. And now we're going to dig in a little bit more into the theme of the day, dig into this real talk, and really get started on talking about what it's been like navigating through change and what we see, what you both see as the next steps and future for your organizations. So let's start with what you and your organization experienced or learned over the last year. Wayne, could you start us off with that question?
Love to, Ruby. Thank you very much. We learned that it's good to be Indigenous, because what we were able to do is to tap into the resiliency that's in our DNA that has allowed us to survive on this continent for time immemorial, right? And so one of the things we learned is that during this pandemic, tribal nations were prepared in a weird way. So oftentimes we're dealing in crisis, we're dealing in tough things in the moment. A lot of our tribal nations were prepared. They took great steps to exercise their sovereignty to ensure that they were protecting their tribal citizens in ways and shapes and forms that oftentimes the local, state, and federal government wasn't ready for. From our organization's point of view, what we really did this year was take a step back and try to breathe, relax, and work our way through things. We tried to make sure that we were available to offer support for tribal nations and our change makers that run through our Rebuilders program, so that we can really help them in this transfer, this really difficult time. It's been fun learning. Like, we've done a lot of learning this year as well. Listening to tribal nations, listening to our leadership program alum, hearing the issues they're going through, helping us to think about the future of NGC and how we move things forward. I mean, we took a leadership program that met 4 times a year in person and completely transformed it to a remote and an online version. And we're able to take our 11th cohort of our leadership program, totally digital, totally virtual, in a pretty seamless transition. It's allowed for us to reimagine our work. Another thing that we're gonna prioritize in the near future is for 11 years now, this work that we're doing in this region has been about educating. It's been about imbuing Native people with these ideas of Native nation rebuilding and how best to bring your community together to serve your people. And so we've done a really good job educating. And what we want to do in the future now is take these folks that are educated and help create a movement of nation building. Because fundamentally at our core, we believe that when you tap into the Indigenous wisdom that is in our DNA as Native folks, we share with this land, not only as we heal Native nations, we're going to help be able to heal the world. I mean, that's something to my core, I believe. So I think those are probably the biggest lessons. It's good to be Indigenous. It's really cool to be resilient. And we got to go from education and movement. We have to be the change.
Thank you, Wayne. I got to give snaps for that. It's good to be Indigenous. And thank you for that reminder of how your ancestors and all they experienced has prepared you for this moment and for this time. I find that really meaningful. Kandace, I'm going to toss the question over to you. What did you and or your organization experience or learn over the last year?
Yeah, also snaps to it's good to be Indigenous. I'm like, I think we also learned it's good to be Black.
Snaps for that.
We're both, right? And all the above. Yeah, thank you for that question. Last year was a doozy for Black Visions, especially because we were going from, a pretty small organization that honestly was just like doing the work. We're still, I think, in our toddler phase as an organization, though sometimes folks, I think, forget that after last year, but we very much were, a staff of just about 5 people, just doing the work of building with folks one-on-one, building our membership, running campaigns, but certainly with not as much spotlight on them, or national or global attention. So, we really experienced a moment in which our work was really propelled forward in some ways that we were prepared for, in some ways that we weren't. And having to grow in that process. I think that one of the biggest lessons is just the importance and power of building infrastructure and building for the long term. Black Visions came out of a dream to build a sustainable, visionary, and strategic organization for Black people, because we, at the time, the BLM movement had happened, but there wasn't a lot of infrastructure left. Other Black organizations were, falling apart or not as functional, especially those who are really pushing towards the left, right, in our politics. And so we, committed ourselves to building an organization, something that would last and something that had resources so that the homies didn't have to throw up a GoFundMe every time they needed to pay rent. And and then being able to do that in 2018, when we launched our work to call on the city council to defund the police, it allowed us to be ready in 2020, after crisis, and after death and violence of another Black body, to not only respond in a reactionary way, but actually propel us forward to towards systemic change. And I think that's so important to the story. People are like, you guys, 2020, no, we've been doing this for a minute, honey. Okay. And that's the only reason that we were really able to, I think, see the sort of change and really a clear call for justice that doesn't rely on the same violent system of incarceration as a false choice to, ever getting the life of somebody back. So that, that's a really big piece of what we learned in the importance of infrastructure. I would also just say about pace and moving at the speed of trust. There were some moments where we did have to slow down and it was really hard, but it was really necessary. And there was also moments where we weren't able to slow down, or we chose not to slow down. And ultimately it it fractured relationship, or, it caused harm even sometimes. And really just thinking about that, when we are casting forward a big vision, something that feels scary, that we really have to figure out how we slow down with our people, and offer that with the same sense of urgency, that the time is now. We don't need another George Floyd or another Dalal to happen. We need to be calling for radical change now, and we need to do that in a way that our folks can come along.
Thank you for that response, Kandace. I appreciate what you shared about the balance between how long y'all have been doing this work, how long the community has been doing this work, how long the work has been going on, but organizationally, the ways in which Black Visions is still learning and growing and participating in that growth process. So this, I think, leads pretty smoothly into my next question, which is, how are you thinking about what's next for your organization and for the communities you serve? I'll have you take that question first, Kandace.
Yeah. Oh, I'm spotlighted and you can hear me. Great. Yeah, what comes next for us? Well, one, we are slowing down and doing some strategic planning. The real sexy stuff of being in meetings for a really long time and processing everybody's feeling about a decision. We're doing that. And really demanding that of ourselves and asking, our comrades, our allies, the folks who support us to give us the space to do it. I think that what is true about our field and, the sector in general is that we don't have a lot of Black infrastructure. And so oftentimes Black Visions is called on to answer all of the problems for all of the Black people. And we certainly cannot do that and don't wish to do that. And so we are trying to really figure out what is the piece of the pie over the long term that we want to hold down. And then how do we support other people? So that's a really important piece for our work is we're actually taking this year to figure out what comes next concretely. And then secondly, continuing, my co-executive director, Miski Noor, says that we're in a covenant with the city of Minneapolis around policing, right? Like that we have, a sacredness to continuing to move forward that fight in a way that is really calling on all of us to reimagine safety and to imagine a new way of being together and then invest the dollars in strategies and solutions around safety and public health that actually work. Obviously, you all know that the police, in my opinion, are a total failure at that job. So we're continuing to do that work, and what that will look like is partnering up with folks in coalition to see some infrastructure changes at our city. And we're hoping that voters are going to be able to vote on that this year. As well, learning from our folks in the US South and the global South around how to hold people's movement assemblies, which are really places where you get to spend years actually coming together for political education and again, slowing down to have these really critical conversations to shape an agenda led by the people, as well really be in a practice of co-governance. I think that's what we feel is necessary, not just for our organization, but for our movements, is that the folks who are part of our organizations, the leaders in our movements, are really thinking about how are we leaning towards co-governance and asking people to be part of everyday decisions more actively. So that's a lot of what comes next for us. We're also staffing up. I saw a couple different of the breakouts. I just want to shout out, we're hiring some finance folks, some communications people, some organizers. Go ahead and check us out on nonprofit, Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, if you want to work with us. But yeah, just on a serious tip, actually really investing in the infrastructure of our organization so that we can not only withstand the next storm that is inevitably coming because of the way the world is going at this point, but really be able to move all of us forward in ways that feel good and that feel healing and feel generative.
Thank you, Kandace. Thanks for sharing a vision for the future for Black Visions. Wayne, could you please tell us about how you are thinking about what's next for Native Governance Center and for the communities you serve?
Yeah. First of all, Kandace, thanks for going first, because man, you had me thinking. And it's the cool thing about it, right, is all the parallels that I feel like our organization and your organization are going through, because we are in the midst of a strategic planning process ourselves. We started it pre-pandemic, and then we got into the middle of the pandemic, and oh boy, how our focus how things shifted, right? So we had to be nimble. We had to be patient with ourselves. We had to understand that, because so much of our work at Native Governance Center is built on building strong relationships, that it was just going to take a little bit of time. I know I think Amanda Zaiba Mwanda from Propel presents later today. She's helping us with our plan. And it's one of those things like, she's like, Wayne, we're behind, but we're on time, right? So just don't worry about it. We're behind, but we're on time. And so when I think about how we took on strategic planning, the largest chunk of that came from us just going out and listening. And so that's something that we as an organization prioritize. Our work is only as relevant as the issues that our communities and our tribal nations are facing, right? And while we are definitely experts in the field, we don't know what's best. We don't come in and try to prescribe solutions for tribal nations. We go in and listen to them and hear, and then, like I said, bring our resources to bear. And so when I think about our strategic planning process, we're on the cusp of this. Actually, we're having a great retreat with our board and our staff later this week to really talk about and hone in on the things that we really feel are going to allow us to go from an organization that is about educating about Native nation building and then to creating this nation building movement in the region. And the other thing as an organization that we're going to look strong to do is continue to build alliances. So Indian country, Native nations, indigenous peoples, we're a small population, right? So we have to afford ourselves the opportunity to build broad alliances across sectors, across demographics, across the country, across this world, in order to help smash the invisibility I mentioned earlier. We want to make sure that we're building strong partnerships that are reciprocal in nature, where we can impart knowledge on people, but we also want to gain knowledge from them. So Kandace, again, something you said about looking outside, looking other places, about how do you create movements and sustain movements. That's something that we're going to be taking a hard look at this next year as well. Because what we want to do is, I think we're all here today working on these problems that are multi-generational problems. And what we need to do is create the resources and support that's going to be multi-generational as well. So I think that's finally the last thing that we're trying to do. As Native Governance Center, we do our work for little to no cost to our tribal partners. We completely pay for our leadership program because we understand that folks coming in from Indigenous communities have a lot of the things that they have to focus on and worry about than paying a tuition to come get this education that we provide. And so we as an organization, as we're looking to sustainability, it's about talking more about our model, talking more about our work, why it's important, why it's fundamental, like I said earlier, not only to improving Native nations, but to the general public as well. It's kind of funny when I've been going out and talking a little bit more lately, how much, even in the great state of Minnesota, even with one of the top education systems in the country, the disparities for BIPOC folks is just, they're kind of egregious. And so the work we have to do is long and hard. And like I said, we have to find multi-generational resource and support for our multi-generational problems.
Wayne, just keeping it coming with those quotables. We're behind, but we're on time. I felt that. I felt that right here. Thank you so much for your response to that question. And now I want to ask you both, what's required of our sector and ourselves to get to these next steps? So Kandace, you shared a lot about infrastructure building and investing in the leadership of Black people in Minneapolis. Can you share more about what's required of our sector and ourselves to get to this vision?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that, Wayne. I just really resonated with the multi-generational approach, and really that I think connects directly to what I feel my answer to this question is, which is like, we have to get out of our silos. I actually think that is like part of what's required of our work. For example, oftentimes with policing, folks are sort of like, it's like one issue and like, we'll just like tackle it. But then when I talk to my comrades who are in housing or healthcare or working on social service issues, or even the environmental justice, like I always ask, well, who's the person who evicts your members? Or who's the person who, kicks your strikers off of a job site? Or who's the person who is outside of the hospital, criminalizing people who probably are just trying to get out from the cold, right? It's the police every single time. And we could say that about any of our issues, any of the work that we do, is that it's not just a single issue. Audre Lorde said, we don't live single issue lives. And I think that that's really important for our sector, is that we figure out how to really build the bridges and see ourselves more as part of a movement, rather than like, okay, we work on this one issue and I'm going to only hang out with the other people who work on this one issue. We're losing so much knowledge and so much power when we do that. And I really love folks like Adrienne Maree Brown and the way they talk about ecosystems. And for me, an ecosystem is really about, versus a coalition, right? Where everybody kind of does the same thing and we come together and we do it. ecosystems allow everybody to have their individual and unique role, and that be interdependent to the success of everybody else around them. And I really like have a vision for Minnesota's movements for folks in the nonprofit sector to be living in so much more of an ecosystem together, where we feel really good about each other taking on the thing that we're taking on, because we have a vision and a set of values that are guiding us all together. So, you know, I think that's what is required of our sector, and for ourselves. It's really to challenge ourselves. I think that this last year has really asked me to think about, what does it mean to actually live into my values? If I say I'm a Black queer feminist, if I say I'm an abolitionist, what does that mean? Not just how I act at work or how we develop, for example, employee policies and like make sure that they're not based in punishment, but how does that come home with me? How do I think about my relationships when my partner just pisses me off? You know, like we all been there. Okay, silent treatment for the rest of the night. We're done, right? That's not actually a way of living into what we believe is abolition. So I think that for all of us, it's like, what does it mean to actually translate our values into our real lives? And dig deeper than that, I guess, like, and then be continuously pushing ourselves, be continuously saying, oh, there's something scary about what those young people over there are offering. And instead of being afraid of it or trying to justify our way away from it, let me lean into it, right? Because there's probably a reason it's scary, and mostly it's because it's unknown. And not necessarily because it's wrong or bad. And so I think that that's what's also necessary for all of us.
Thank you, Kandace. I'm sitting with that question. I'm sitting with the question of, how do my values come home with me? I really appreciate that offering. I'm gonna toss the question over to Wayne as well, but also just shout out what Julie's been putting in the chat, which is that we will have an opportunity for Q&A. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll share them with Kandace and Wayne to answer. Wayne, could you please take a moment to respond to the question of what's required of our sector and ourselves to get to your vision? You kind of shared with us some of the things you see next in terms of alliance building and strategic planning. What do you think is required of our sector and ourselves to get there?
Well, Ruby, before I start, I want to reflect back, like Kandace, when you said we don't live single issue lives, like that just to my soul hit me, right? When I think about our work specifically at Native Governance Center, governance and how people organize and come together as a people in order to share their power to benefit all is literally like, I mean, it touches every facet of your life. So when you said that, I'm like, man, that's the crux of our work. And I love the way you phrased that. You know, I think for our sector, we need to trust in people. We need to trust in our teams. We need to trust in the people we're working with. First and foremost, I think the collective wisdom we have, the knowledge of where we want to get there is bubbling up in ways that, especially in this last year, I've yet to see. And mind you, I don't come from a deep, long history in the nonprofit world. Like, you know, from my bio, I spent the majority of my professional career serving my tribal nation. And so to get out here into this new sector of the nonprofit world and see the ability and nimbleness by with which we can react and move forward is truly humbling and honoring. And I'd love to be a part of this. I think we're going to have to be brave. We're going to have to be bold. And one of the biggest things where we're going to have to be brave and bold is we need to flip philanthropy on its head. There has to come a reckoning, right? We have to make sure that we try to get the folks who help fund our work away from the idea that, you know, we just give our 5% every year and then we're done. We've done our good. No, there's so much more you can be doing. You need to listen to the folks that you work with here at the nonprofit level. You need to think about how the huge corpus of money you have is invested in Wall Street, and we need to get it invested in the streets. There are so many great projects, so many great initiatives that money could be invested into our communities, into our tribal nations. You could get a better return on the investment and a more meaningful return on the investment than having it sit with Amazon or GameStop or AMC. just so you all know, I was invested in AMC before all the hubbub, but I got burned. They froze me on my Robinhood account. I couldn't trade, so I'm a little miffed about that. And then I think another thing, as we're helping to flip philanthropy on its head, we're helping them to get them to vision and think about things differently. Nonprofits, we have to get out of the mindset that we need to be competitive with each other. And like Kandace said, we have to start collaborating and working together with each other. I'm seeing that more and more. The Headwaters Foundation for Justice, I just participated in their giving project. And to see that group of folks come together across race, across class, across just all types of living conditions. And you all, in about 6 months during a pandemic for the Giving Project, we raised about a little over $200,000 to fund BIPOC grassroots change. So and that it was all through our personal network. So don't tell me that our communities can't give. Don't tell me they can't. They can and they will. We give differently. We give in different ways oftentimes, but when called upon, our communities rally, our tribal nations rally, our people rally. So I think that's a big part of how we have to think in the sectors. Not be afraid to lean into the community that we serve, not only to get to the ideas, but to get to the resources and to get what we need to move forward. What we're going to do at NGC to get us there is we're going to continue to listen, to continue to go out, to continue to communicate. Like I said, fundamentally, our work is based on relationships. In the 5 years we've existed, I'm not sure if people realize our story, right? We inherited this work from the Bush Foundation. So literally, for the first 2.5 years when we would go out, people thought I worked for Bush, right? So it took us almost 3 years to get them to separate that designation. And so we're going to continue to do that way. We're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to talk with community. We're going to talk with elected leaders, and we're going to talk with allies and how we can move collectively forward.
Thank you, Wayne. I can see that your answer really activated the chat, really activated a lot of the gallery. People were snapping, clapping. Before I move on, I just want to actually open it back up to Kandace, because I know some of our prep calls we had conversations about philanthropy and some of the changes that need to happen there. Is there anything that you'd add to Wayne's response, Kandace?
Yeah, I mean, like, my heart shakes and is so happy with that response. And folks in the chat talking about that. You know, I would definitely just double down on that I believe the job of philanthropy should be getting themselves out of a job. That's how I think that philanthropy should be giving, is at such a rate in which the literal trillions of dollars that are being sat on are actively being reinvested in our community. Now, do I think that that should just be, you know, hey, y'all, here's the checkbook, run with it? No, because what is also very true is that our communities have had a lack of infrastructure and even had a lack of time to really build these long-term visions and plans. And so I think it's important how we make investments and how money moves, but the way it's happening right now is not strategic and is not you know, what we actually need. And so I think we need to hold that, you know, those contradictions, but at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, let's get up off of even, you know, 25% of your endowment. What that could do every year would be huge. And I speak because Black Visions in some ways got forced into the role of a funder this year. We raised a lot of money, not in which we basically asked for. Someone posted our fundraising link, and then a bunch of people across the country posted our fundraising link. And then all of a sudden we had raised $30 million in 1 year. I want to say that 97% of that is from individual donors. And let that sit in for you, right? That philanthropy came through, but not at all close to what individuals gave. And then when philanthropy did come through, they were still asking me to fill out paperwork. I was like, have you listened to none of the panels that you'd go to? Have you done none of it? Right. So I think that that's important. And then we gave 9 million away in 6 months. And we gave that all to Black-led formations, many of whom would never have gotten more than $5,000 at a time, got $30, $50, $100,000 to invest in their work immediately, and with no requirements, and some basic reporting so that we can harvest the stories and think about how we do this better as we continue to redistribute our funds. But that's the power of what we can do together when we actually lean into what Wayne is saying of like, trust your people, trust the people. Good work will happen, and it happens actually even when folks are not investing in it. And that's the reality of work led by BIPOC folks, is that it's happening regardless. And look what happens when you actually can invest in it. When you actually do put those dollars forward, you get a native governance, you get a Black visions out here able to like be in moments of crisis and absorb that energy.
Thank you for that response, Kandace. My next question is really similar to what we're talking about right now. And so you may feel like we've answered it, but if you have anything to add, where do we start in improving and investing in the infrastructure of leadership for Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color in this sector? Wayne, do you want to share your response to that?
Love to, Ruby. I think where you start is you ask. You ask them what tools they need, and then you go out and get them the tools they need to do their work. So many of the conversations we have with elected tribal leaders in trying to really deal with tough situations for their tribal nations, understanding, and I don't think enough folks understand, a tribal chairman is akin to the president of the United States. Except when you're an elected tribal leader, I defy you to find someone who's an elected person who has to be more responsive to their constituents than an elected tribal leader, because who you're representing is your family. Like, I can't tell you how many times when I was on the council, I had my auntie call and be like, hey, Wayne, you need to give your cousin a job, right? And I'm like, well, I can't do that. There's policies. This is how we do things, right? And I also recall a time when I was the vice chairman. I had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to drive an hour and a half to Pierre, South Dakota, to jump on a plane for a one-day trip to Washington, D.C., to go argue with Army Corps of Engineer lawyers about a flooded river on our reservation and how they needed to compensate us for this flooding. Because of their poor mismanagement of a dam that is below our reservation, it ended up taking a lot of our land and making it unusable. And so go to bed late that night because I'm nervous anticipating that meeting. Get a call at 3:30 though, and it's the property and supply director, and one of the grandmas at home was out of propane. And so I had to wake up, figure out what was going on, make sure grandma got propane. Well, then I was up for the day. I jumped on a plane. The whole time I'm texting, making sure all the stuff happens tribally for our business. Land in DC, drive to the Pentagon, walk into a conference room, have a 2.5 hour knockdown drag out with Army Corps of Engineers attorneys, prove them wrong, point after point. Nothing changed, unfortunately. Jumped on a plane and flew home. And it was really good because on the way home, I got the message that grandma got her propane, right? So as Indigenous folks, as tribal leaders, that's the total package of what we have to deal with. And so when you're trying to find out what help our people need, it's just about going out and asking them. So for me, in that day, it would have been like, man, I could use 3 or 4 other people to help me. I could use tips on negotiating with the federal government. I could use, what does our community need? Because that's the other thing. When we're trying to create these healthy ecosystems within our communities, within our tribal nations in particular, like, at Cheyenne River, you can clearly see there are a lack of things like proper accounting and finance help for tribal entrepreneurs. There's huge gaps in access to capital for everything from small businesses to farm and ranch operations to all these things. And so I think the best place to start when trying to improve and invest in leadership is to go out and ask the leaders what they need. And I think that's probably something that's universal and cross sector. I think that through that is how we're going to find our way to improvement. So.
Thank you, Wayne. Kandace, anything to add to the question of where we start in improving and investing in the infrastructure of leadership for Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color in this sector?
Yeah, well, one thing I just wanted to add, and I'm sure Wayne agrees with me, is also when we're saying like ask us what we need, we're not saying develop a 6 or 2 year long surveying project in which you hire a white consultant to come in and ask us what we've been telling you already, and like you could like Google different reports and stuff. And so I think that that's important to underline, you know, is this like the answers have also been there, and it's not about creating more work for us. It's about really figuring out and how you can show up and how you can be of support. Feels like an important element of that. I would also just say like invest in the BIPOC folks who you are with right now. You know, I'm like, and hire them and hire them, especially like if they have a lot of potential. That is the thing, is like we know white supremacy, the sort of conditions of you know, racial capitalism, all of these different things keep Black and Indigenous folks from education opportunities, from job opportunities, from being seen as professional in general. It's only recently that like people could wear their dreadlocks to work, right? In like my lifetime and still be considered a professional. And so I think it's important to actually really hire those folks and to see potential and to see a vision for people's leadership, and then to give them the support, the coaching, the training, the well-paid job, so that they can actually expand that leadership. It is, you know, unfortunately too difficult to find, you know, folks who can be managers and leads of programs or even directors. Right now in Minnesota. And it's not because I don't think we have a lot of folks with talent. I think it is about that historical lack of investment. And so would want to ask everybody on this call is like, you know, are you doing that right now? Have you actually given a young Black or Indigenous person or person of color a chance to be on your staff, even if they didn't have the same sparkling resume as the white dude who had all of the opportunities before them, right? I think that that's, you know, an important piece of doing that. And again, back just to like the money thing is like, then give us the resources, invest in BIPOC-led organizations. Often, you know, I think there's some good conversation in the chat that like folks are doing this, and it's actually oftentimes about funders not trusting that we can invest, trusting that we can handle our own finances, all of these types of things. So I think it is really about extending and challenging ourselves to build real trust.
Thank you, Kandace. I am going to move us on to my favorite question of the panel and share another reminder that we are taking questions for the Q&A. So sort of last chance to get your questions in. You both have shared such strong visions of the future you see for your organizations, for yourselves, for our communities in Minnesota. I want to ask the both of you, where and who do you turn to activate or nurture the imagination that's required to build these types of visions? How do you nurture a practice of active imagination? Wayne, will you start us off?
I will. I'm going to start with the canned corny answer, right? That it's really with my kids. So I was 37 before I became a dad. Was so used to being Uncle Wayne that I can remember holding my daughter second week we had her home and saying, "Oh, Uncle loves you. I mean, your dad loves you," right? And so I think it's one of those things that one of the things that I love most about my day is when I slow down, when I unplug from work, and when I just play with my kids. And whether that's dinosaurs and trucks with my 4-year-old son Aiden, or Fortnite with my daughter Veda, right? Like it's definitely a place that can help me reset, reconnect with what it's like to like just think big, think different. And I think the other place I turn to, which is I'm assuming everyone here has, it's with the team that we've brought together at Native Governance Center. When I worked for my tribe, so often our hiring processes were convoluted, and especially when I came in as the administrative officer, I inherited supervision of 70+ program and 500 employees that, they weren't all folks I hired. And to mix and match and figure out how to best work with folks, that was challenging at times. But with the staff that we have at Native Governance Center, I literally feel like we've hired the best and the brightest. We've hired the people that are most passionate about the work. And I'm my style of leadership is oftentimes is to bring people in, great people, and get out of their way and let them do great work. And that's not say to completely abandon the ship and not be there to help steer and, move the sail and control the rudder. But, back to when I was talking about trusting in people and community, trust the people that you're working with too. And so the imagination that comes from my staff, the creativity, just as an example, we threw together a 3-year project to apply for an Administration for Native Americans grant. The 3-year project we threw together in a span of about 18 days. And it was a phenomenal project, right? But just turn people loose, let them be creative, and let them really move. And then I think the last place I always turn, and it's more so later in my life, because I didn't grow up with my culture, I didn't grow up with my traditions. But the more I get back to being what Lakota is, the more that rejuvenates me and helps me think differently. So when you think from your cultural background, it's different than dominant society background and the American system, right? There are words in our language that there's no translation for in English. And so the more I read, the more I read and understand about my culture, the more elders I talk to, the more I get curious about, ceremonies and the practices we have as Indigenous folks, the more my world opens up and the more I think differently. So I think those would be the 3 things: my kids, my staff, and my culture.
Thank you, Wayne. Kandace, going to turn the question to you. Where and who do you turn to activate or nurture your imagination and nurture a practice of active imagination?
First, Wayne, shout out to you becoming a dad at 37. Kind of my auntie forever until I can't anymore vibe is what I'm also about. So don't tell my mom. But yes, absolutely. If folks know me, like especially my personal life, they know I really love visioning. I really think about it a lot in our work because I think that capitalism, part of the mechanism of capitalism keeps us from visioning intentionally so that we never question our circumstances. We just see it as is, right? We just think that, oh, well, just sometimes people are homeless, right? And we never actually think about a vision in which nobody is homeless. And so I think it's important to find ways all the time, honestly. Like I do it a lot with our staff. And with our team and our members, is just small ways to do that. Like if you could blah, 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 what would you do? And just offering those ways of just doing check-ins is, something that I just try to bring it into my work all the time. Or when we're sitting down to build a long-term plan, we always start with visioning first. It's not okay, what do we want to get out of this? It's what could this feel like, look like, taste like, smell like, if we were to be successful. And then we get into goals, and then we get into objectives, and then we get into timelines, but always starting with vision. And then there's so many people. First of all, I go to Black people for my vision. I go to TikTok, young Black people, Instagram, the ways that people are just pulling together art, is so inspirational to me. I also will admit, I'm not good at reading nonfiction, quite frankly. I really have to push myself when I'm okay, I need to beef up my skills on this or beef up my knowledge. But I love Afrofuturism. Octavia E. Butler is one of my favorite authors and really made me and shaped me into the type of organizer I am today. As a really big source. And then I have a trusted crew of comrades, across the country who I really go to. Sometimes it's just a key and to complain about the movement, or complain about the work, or complain about whatever. And sometimes it is just about, going through some struggle and asking people to come in and kind of fill up my cup again. with their perspective and their experience and their love. So, you know, it's definitely a combination of all of those things. And I'm very blessed to be in a relationship with someone who's an artist and is always like, so like sleep is okay, you know, rest is actually really important to your imagination and your creativity in this work. And so they're, you know, just like a grounding force for me of what does it actually mean to nourish myself in a way so that I can be imaginative and be coming from a place of abundance rather than scarcity.
Thank you, Kandace. Thank you both for your brilliance and for allowing me to hold it and hold this conversation between the two of you. I see so many questions coming up in the chat, and so I'm going to make space for them. So Julie, I'm just going to ask how you want to manage this. And before you answer, I did receive some DMs with messages. So I would just ask those people to please repeat your question in the public forum so that Julie can help me manage this Q&A. But I'll let you take it away, Julie. Thank you again, Kandace and Wayne.
Yes, thank you, Ruby and Kandace and Wayne. Oh my gosh. So many quotables, so many inspiring comments and thoughts for all of us to take away. Yes, we did get several questions. So we've got about 15 minutes. So we'll try to get through as many as we're able to. Please keep the questions coming in the chat. You can just type them in there. Just make sure it's going to everyone so that I can grab those. So we have a question from Tiffany. Are there practical tips for designing solutions with communities that ensure they're represented and at the table without relying upon traditional community engagement methods that miss the mark? Kandace, as you said, like, don't send me another survey. You know, don't hire a white consultant to come into our community and have 2 years worth of conversations. What other methods might be most helpful that Kandace, you would recommend, or Wayne?
And transparently, I was answering a question in the chat. Can you remind me the top of the question again?
Of course, of course. Are there practical tips for designing solutions with communities that ensure they're represented and at the table without relying upon traditional community engagement methods that miss the mark?
Well, I would say funders should hire more organizers. That's my number one. You know, folks who are like, okay, I'm going to take a break. Folks who actually have done the work. Those are my favorite program officers. Those are the people I love working with because they've done the work. And they get it, and they know even just how to schedule with me. They know like what's helpful to bring to a conversation, what's not. And they're super realistic about like what our organization can, you know, join what convenings, all of those kinds of things. So I think that that's a really big piece, is like hire the people who have actually done the work that you're funding to help inform that. And then I think that like there are ways of I mean, just like straight up moving away from the paperwork, honestly. I don't know if there's any other way to say it, but like moving away from the paperwork, sometimes just like the reporting requirements, the grant requirements, all of these things, like, and then there's so many times, even in this last year, I'm like, hey, y'all, we're going to be late on this because 2020. And then a program officer is like, oh, well, we can just get on an hour-long call and talk about it. Why wasn't that an option at the beginning? You know, like, can we just get on an hour-long call to apply and then an hour-long call to close it out? And we actually be in real relationship. You come to our events, you know, you talk to us. That would just be so much better. It's so much easier to coordinate that. I think are some real ways of actually thinking about how to invest. I would also say that there's just like, you know, I think people need investments. Like after you actually figure out what that is, what are those needs, making investments that are long term. Like Wayne said, this is multi-generational. So you giving me a chunk of money that I have to go and reapply for again in 9 months is not actually helpful to my work. And so like, what does it mean to make big investments at once for 3 years, a 3-year commitment or a 5-year commitment, so that we can actually catch our breath before we have to go back to you and reapply. So I think that those are some critical ways that like just changing some of those mechanisms could free up a lot of capacity. Especially because like having folks like Wayne and myself and the other brilliant people who are leading organizations, I just don't think it's a good use of our time to have us sitting behind screens filling out grant reports instead of, well, you know, now still sitting behind screens, but talking with our people, having real conversations, supporting our staff so that they can become the kind of leaders that we need, helping us just change those dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Can I jump in, Julie?
Of course, Wayne.
Right on.
Please do.
So I just have 2 quick thoughts, right? Practical tips, bringing people to the table. Make sure you have a big enough table, right? You're going to want to make sure that all voices are heard. Communities aren't monoliths. Not one person can represent everybody. Have diversity in amongst the community, age, social station, everything, right? So make sure you have a big enough table. And when it's safe, for God's sake, put the table in the community. Don't make people leave their community to come to you, to go to the, 99th floor, to sit in a glass windowed conference room and expect them to feel comfortable and be able to share. Come down to our community center within one of our tribal communities like Swiftbird or Eagle Butte. Come to one of the churches in, other communities. Come into the community and have the conversation. So those are my 2 tips. Have a big table and put the table in community.
I saw lots of clapping happening while you were saying that, Wayne. Yes. Yes. Kandace says, no one wants to go downtown. Truth. That's great. All right. Let's get on to another question here. Matt had a question about, what approaches we can take as a collective to shift the dominant nonprofit funding sources from ones that are rooted in charity and state-sanctioned grants to ones that are more cooperative and self-sustaining. Like, I think it's incredible, Kandace, that 97% of those funds that came into Black Visions were from individual donors. Like, we as a community know what we need. We know how to support one another. How can we foster that same sense of supporting our communities in ways that maybe make us a little less reliant on some of those traditional philanthropic sources that require lots of paperwork and, hiring a grant writer, which for many organizations is just not possible for capacity and budget reasons. So Wayne, do you want to start with that one, and then we can turn it over to Kandace?
Yeah. And so like I said, prior to coming here to Native Governance Center, I definitely was a part of the model, being a tribal leader, dealing with the federal government for our grants, for our programmatic funding, having to fill out SF 429 forms, putting in data that didn't tell a story, that just meant benchmarks, right? And I struggle with that often. And so when I think about, shoot, and then I just lost my train of thought. Remind me the crux of your question, Julie.
How we can move to a more kind of collaborative, self-sustaining, community-based fundraising model.
And that's where my thought was. Because when I moved to this role, we're a public charity. So that stigma of that I have to ask for this help, there's a sense that came, for me at least, like, am I even worthy? Is this cause worthy, right? And I had a great friend who, Kim Traversy, she's from Cheyenne River. She kicked my butt. She's like, Wayne, you're not begging for help. You're bringing people along to identify problems and feel a need. So you should never feel ashamed. You should never feel nervous when speaking about your mission. She said, do you care about your mission? Well, yeah. I wouldn't have picked up and left home and moved to Minnesota to do this job if I didn't care about it. She said, then go in there and be righteous. Know the cause that you are working for is a righteous one, and people will come to it. people will work with you. But again, I think a part of it has to go back to that, flipping philanthropy on its head, changing the mindset to get them to think that, again, we can do more than that 5%. They can think differently, more creatively about how to continue to invest in community, and that they're not giving charity. They're not doing a favor. They're making the world right. So yeah, I guess that's my thought.
That's so right. Yeah, you're making an investment in your community. Yeah. Kandace, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just like totally agree with Wayne and us all as folks who are leading nonprofits, like going in with that level of boldness as well when we make those asks, which we inevitably have to do, is like we also have to change how we approach the work, that we really call people to make bold investments, individuals to make bold investments. I think that that's important. And someone asked a question of like, how is Black Visions going to be sustaining our ongoing donors? I'm like, first I have to hire someone to help lead that work. And so I think that for foundations, actually resourcing those positions so that are about our sustainability and our autonomy away from philanthropy is like one radical way of going about that. And for our organizations to actually invest in those people, for a long time, it was able to be me, but now because of how big we've grown and how many supporters we have, like that's a whole other person's job. And so really thinking about that. And there are folks on this call, a shout out Leah and other folks who have really trained me up in thinking about how we ask people to not just give to the work, but engage in the work. Folks are going to have so much more skin in the game if we're not just coming to them with asks to donate, but also asks to get involved, So, I mean, every time we send out something to our donor list, it's always like, yes, do this. Hey, if you're not a sustainer, do that too, because that's cute, but also sign this petition, join this meeting, check out this resource, because we also want folks to be getting deeper into this work. And so at the same time that they're making those kinds of investments. So I think that that's another important piece of that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kandace. Yeah. I'm not pitching my own presentation, but I am actually going to be talking about that later this afternoon at 2:15. If anyone wants to join us for a conversation about engagement in a virtual world. Okay, shameless plug over. I would love to just sit here and continue asking questions and talk with you both. I so appreciate your time sharing what you know with us and inspiring us to kind of ready ourselves for what's next. And thank you to Ruby for moderating. If we could get a little applause for our speakers and Ruby. And I am now going to turn it over to Andrea, just for a couple of kind of last minute logistical details about what's next. Again, thank you everyone. Andrea, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kandace and Wayne. That was probably the best plenary I have ever attended. Such powerful points. You totally set the tone for today, and we're so grateful for your time and your energy and all the efforts you put in today. So thank you again. Love you. So now we get to take a 15-minute break. We'll put the bit.ly links for each of the breakouts in the chat. You can also find all the session descriptions in the pre-event email we sent you earlier. So go ahead and click on those when we come back. We will be back at 10:45. So join us back, open a web browser, go directly to the session that you want to join, and you'll be met by lovely people there. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. Kandace and Wayne, thank you. Enjoy the day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.